In the vast river of human history, there were two fearsome giants whose stories are still told today. One was Og, king of Bashan, who ruled 60 cities, and the other was Goliath, a Philistine warrior who stood 9 feet tall. They once struck fear into entire armies, yet ultimately fell to seemingly weaker opponents. This is a legend about faith and courage. It is also a story that teaches us how to face the giants in our lives. Among them, King Og of Bashan was particularly renowned. He was the mightiest king of the Amorites, who established a vast kingdom in the Bashan region east of the Jordan River. This land was rich and fertile, covered with lush oak forests and abundant pastures. In Ashtaroth and Edrei, Og built fortified cities, ruling over this prosperous territory. His fame spread far and wide, not only because he ruled 60 fortified cities, but also due to his incredible stature. When the Israelites, led by Moses, embarked on their journey to return to the Promised Land, they had to pass through this territory. This was the inheritance that God had long promised to their ancestors. Yet the journey was full of challenges. Numbers chapter 21 verses 33 records. And they turned and went up by the way of Bashan, and Og, the king of Bashan, went out against them, he and all his people, to battle at Edrei. Before encountering King Og, the Israelites had experienced an important battle. They had faced opposition from another Amorite king, Sihon. Moses, with a peaceful attitude, sent messengers to Sihon. They requested permission to pass through his territory, promising to stay on the main road without turning aside. They even offered to pay for food and water, vowing not to use any of the Amorites' resources. However, Sihon not only rejected this reasonable request, but led his entire army to attack the Israelites. In the wilderness of Yahaz, a fierce battle erupted. The Lord was with the Israelites in this battle, helping them achieve a glorious victory. They conquered all of Sihon's territory, from the Arnon River to the Jabbok River. This victory showed the Israelites God's faithfulness and power, also adding confidence for their upcoming journey. When they reached the Bashan region, King Og likewise chose a hostile stance. Disregarding the Israelites' previous peaceful intentions, he instead gathered a mighty army. On the plains of Edrei, the two armies faced each other. King Og's army was well equipped, their weapons and armor gleaming in the sunlight. Yet at this crucial moment, the Lord spoke these extremely important words to Moses. Numbers chapter 21 verses 34 records, "And the Lord said to Moses, Fear him not, for I have delivered him into thy hand, and all his people, and his land. You shall do to him as you did to Sihon, king of the Amorites, who dwelt at Heshbon." This promise greatly encouraged the Israelites, for King Og not only commanded a powerful army, but was also known for his incredible size and strength. He was a descendant of the Rephaim, a race renowned for their giant stature. Yet with God's help, the Israelites were fully capable of meeting this challenge. The battle was fierce, but the outcome was surprisingly decisive. Numbers chapter 21 verses 35 records, "So they struck him down together with his sons and all his people, until there was no survivor left, and they possessed his land." Although King Og initiated this war, the battle's outcome was predetermined by the Lord. Under God's guidance, the Israelites displayed remarkable courage and faith. They did not retreat in the face of powerful enemies, but completely trusted in the Lord's promise. This victory not only gave Israel control over all of Bashan, but also showed them the importance of trusting in the Lord. When they fully submitted to God's guidance, they could overcome even the mightiest enemies. This story shows us that, in life's journey, we too will face various challenges and difficulties. But as long as we trust in God and rely on His strength, no difficulty is insurmountable. Therefore, like the Israelites, we must learn to trust in God. When facing challenges, do not fear, but walk with God. For God's promises are reliable. He will help us overcome all difficulties. Let us demonstrate courage and faith in trusting God in our lives. And before every challenge we can say, Lord, I trust in you. In this way, like the Israelites, we can achieve victory and witness God's faithfulness and power. This victory brought the Israelites rich spoils and vast territories. Deuteronomy chapter 3 verses 4 to verses 5 records, "And we took all his cities at that time. There was not a city which we did not take from them, 60 cities. All these cities were fortified with high walls, gates, and bars, besides a great many unwalled villages. These cities were spread throughout the region of Argob, which was King Og's kingdom, in Bashan. Each city was exceptionally fortified, surrounded by high walls. The gates were made of heavy timber and fitted with iron bars. These defenses were built to protect Bashan from invasion. Yet before God's mighty power, these strong fortifications proved useless. The Israelites occupied this fertile land, gaining abundant livestock and possessions. This land became the inheritance of the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh. Deuteronomy chapter 3 verses 13 states the rest of Gilead, and all of Bashan, the kingdom of Og, I gave to the half-tribe of Manasseh. This land was not only vast but also rich in resources. There were fertile pastures suitable for raising livestock. There were dense oak forests providing abundant timber. The cities were prosperous, with thriving commerce, providing excellent settlements for the Israelites. King Og was a fearsome ruler, particularly notable for his physical stature. Deuteronomy chapter 3 verses 11 records, "For only Og, king of Bashan, remained of the remnant of the Rephaim. His bed was made of iron 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide by ordinary cubit. This iron bed was preserved in Rabbah of the Ammonites, becoming a historical testament. By modern measurements, this bed was about 13 feet long and 6 feet wide. Such an enormous bed reflects King Og's incredible size. He was a descendant of the Rephaim, a race famous for their giant stature. Genesis chapter 14 verses 5 mentions that the Rephaim were ancient inhabitants of Canaan. They were tall and immensely strong, striking fear into surrounding nations. King Og may have been 10 to 13 feet tall, truly an intimidating figure in those times. However, this giant's defeat proves that physical size and strength alone do not determine victory. The impact of this war was far-reaching, not only changing the political landscape east of the Jordan, but also leaving a deep impression in the hearts of the Israelites. Joshua chapter 2 verses 10 records, "For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed." News of this victory spread throughout Canaan, causing the local inhabitants' hearts to melt. They realized that Israel's God was the one true God, the Lord of hosts. This story has been preserved in the Bible, passed down through generations. Psalm chapter 135 verses 10 to verses 11 says, "He struck down many nations and killed mighty kings, Sihon king of the Amorites, and Og king of Bashan, and all the kingdoms of Canaan." This victory became a testimony to Israel's faith. Whenever they faced difficulties, they would remember how God helped them defeat the giant King Og. This story also teaches us not to judge by appearances in life's journey. Do not lose faith because of an opponent's strength, for we trust in the Creator of the universe. His power far exceeds any earthly force. When we fully trust in Him, we can experience His wonderful works. This is the precious lesson from the story of King Og of Bashan. In Israel's history, there is another famous giant story from the time of King Saul. 1 Samuel 17 records that the Philistines once again invaded Israel's territory. Their army camped at Soko in Judah, between Soko and Azekah, in Ephes Damim. Saul led the Israelite army to meet them. and both sides faced each other across the valley of Elah. This valley had a unique terrain with steep slopes on both sides, and an open valley in the middle. The Philistines occupied one hilltop while the Israelites were arrayed on the opposite mountain. The valley became a natural battlefield, where any attacking force would have to cross the open ground. This terrain gave the defenders a great advantage, while the attackers would face significant risks. In this situation, the Philistines sent out their mightiest warrior. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 4 to verses 7. Records a champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and wore a coat of armor. This giant warrior from Gath was incredibly tall, about 9 feet by modern measurements. He was covered in bronze armor, weighing 5,000 shekels, about 125 pounds. He wore a gleaming bronze helmet and bronze greaves protecting his legs. Between his shoulders he carried a bronze javelin ready to be thrown. His weapons were equally intimidating, with the spear shaft like a weaver's beam. The iron spearhead alone weighed 600 shekels, about 15 pounds. Before him went his shield-bearer, holding an enormous shield. This shield could cover his entire body, effectively protecting him from arrows. Goliath had not only frightening size and equipment, but also an arrogant attitude. He came into the valley morning and evening, issuing challenges to the Israelite army. He shouted with a thunderous voice that echoed through the valley. His challenge was full of contempt for the Israelites and their faith. He proposed a representative combat, where the victor's side would win the entire battle. This was a common warfare practice in the ancient Near East, used to reduce casualties on both sides. 1 Samuel chapter 17 verses 8 to verses 9 records his challenge, saying, "Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." This challenge continued for 40 days, repeating every single day. The Israelite army, hearing these arrogant words, were terrified. Even King Saul, who was tall in stature, dared not accept the challenge. The entire camp fell into fear and despair. Not a single Israelite warrior dared to accept this challenge. Though they were many in number, they were intimidated by one giant. This standoff was not just about military victory, but was a spiritual battle. Goliath was not just challenging Israel's warriors, but was challenging Israel's God. Just as the Israelite army was gripped by fear, an unexpected figure appeared on the battlefield. 1 Samuel chapter 17 verses 12 records, "Now David was the son of Jesse, an Ephrathite of Bethlehem in Judah. Jesse had 8 sons, and David was the youngest. At this time David was still a young shepherd. He spent his days tending his father's sheep in the hills of Bethlehem. His 3 brothers, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah, were serving in Saul's army, while David divided his time between the camp and home, on one hand tending the sheep, on the other bringing food to his brothers in the army. That day Jesse called David and gave him a special task. 1 Samuel chapter 17 verses 17 to verses 18 records, "And Jesse said to David his son, 'Take for your brothers an ephah of this parched grain and these 10 loaves, and carry them quickly to the camp to your brothers. Also take these 10 cheeses to the commander of their 1,000. See if your brothers are well, and bring some token from them.' David accepted his father's instructions and set out early the next morning. He entrusted the sheep to a keeper and departed with the food. When he arrived at the camp, he found the Israelites marching out to their battle positions. He left the supplies with the keeper of provision, then hurried to the battle lines to find his brothers. Just then he heard the voice of the Philistine giant. He witnessed firsthand how the Israelite army retreated before Goliath. But unlike others, David was not frightened by Goliath's size. A holy anger burned in his young heart, for he saw this Philistine daring to defy the armies of the living God. Though this young shepherd was the youngest, he had the greatest faith, for he knew victory in battle depends not on human ability, but on the Lord's presence. During his days shepherding in the wilderness, he had experienced God's help many times. He believed that the God who helped him kill both lion and bear would surely help him defeat this Philistine who defied the Lord. When David heard Goliath's challenge, his reaction was completely different from others. 1 Samuel chapter 17 verses 26 records David said to the men who stood by him, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God?" In David's eyes, he saw not an invincible giant, but a sinner who dared to blaspheme the Lord. His confidence came from knowing God, not from measuring the enemy's strength. When he asked about Goliath, people told him about a reward. King Saul had promised that whoever killed Goliath would receive great riches. Not only would he receive the king's wealth, but also his daughter in marriage, and his father's house would be free from taxes in Israel. This news had spread throughout the camp, yet no one dared to accept the challenge. David's eldest brother Eliab heard his words and became angry with him. Thinking he had come to watch the excitement, he rebuked him for leaving the sheep in the wilderness. But David did not back down from his brother's rebuke. His words reached King Saul's ears, and Saul summoned him. Facing this young shepherd, Saul said, "You cannot go fight against this Philistine, for you are just a youth, while he has been a warrior from his youth." But David firmly replied that while shepherding in the wilderness, he had killed both lion and bear, protecting his flock. Since this Philistine had defied the armies of the living God, his end would be like those wild beasts. The Lord, who delivered him from lion and bear, would surely deliver him from this Philistine. Saul, moved by David's faith, said, "Go, and may the Lord be with you." Saul dressed David in his own armor, putting a bronze helmet on his head and a coat of mail. But David had never worn such equipment, and found it difficult to move. So he took them off, saying, "I cannot go in these, because I am not used to them." He decided to use his familiar weapon, the sling he used while shepherding. He went to the stream and chose 5 smooth stones, putting them in his shepherd's pouch. Taking his staff and his sling in hand, he went out to meet Goliath. As David walked toward Goliath, the entire Israelite army held their breath. It was an unforgettable scene, an unarmed youth facing a fully armed giant. 1 Samuel chapter 17 verses 42 to verses 44 records, "When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance." Seeing this young man, Goliath was filled with contempt and anger. He thought the Israelites were mocking him by sending a shepherd boy to fight. The Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" And he cursed David by his gods, threatening to give his flesh to the birds of the air. However, David's response stunned everyone present. 1 Samuel chapter 17 verses 45 to verses 47 records. Then David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied this day. The Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head, and I will give the dead bodies of the Philistine army this day to the birds of the air, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's." These words not only showed David's faith, but declared the true meaning of this battle. This was not an ordinary duel, but a spiritual battle concerning God's glory. What happened next became one of the most dramatic scenes in the Bible. As Goliath advanced with his weapons, David ran quickly toward him. As he ran, he reached into his shepherd's bag, drew out a smooth stone, and put it in his sling. David skillfully whirled the sling, aiming at Goliath's forehead. The stone flew out with a whistle, striking its target, sinking deep into Goliath's forehead. The arrogant giant fell to the ground with a thunderous crash. David did not hesitate. He ran to Goliath, drew the giant's own sword, and ended his life with his own weapon. When the Philistines saw their champion fallen dead, their army panicked and fled. The men of Israel and Judah rose with a shout and pursued them as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron. This victory completely changed the battle. The Israelite army pursued in triumph, driving the Philistines out of Israel's territory, collecting abundant spoils along the way. David later took Goliath's head to Jerusalem, and his weapons were stored in the sanctuary. As a permanent memorial of this great victory, the story of David defeating Goliath leaves us with precious spiritual lessons. First, this story teaches us the importance of faith. David was able to defeat a seemingly invincible enemy, not because he had superhuman abilities, but because he had firm faith in God. He knew deeply that the Lord was the one true God, the Lord of hosts. In his eyes, Goliath was merely a sinner who blasphemed God. Such faith gave him courage to face seemingly impossible challenges. Second, we learn not to judge by appearances. 1 Samuel chapter 16 verses 7 says, "The Lord does not see as man sees. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." Goliath had intimidating stature and excellent equipment, but these meant nothing before God. God often uses seemingly weak vessels to accomplish his wonderful works. Third, we understand that victory in battle belongs to the Lord, not to human strength or equipment. David did not rely on Saul's armor, but used the simplest weapon, because he knew true strength comes from God. As he said, "The battle is the Lord's." Fourth, this story reminds us to fight for God's glory. David was angry because Goliath defied the living God. He cared not for personal honor, but that God's name was being dishonored. Such dedication is worthy of our emulation. Fifth, we see that age and status are not limitations. David was just a young shepherd at the time, but God used him to accomplish great things, because God values a person's heart, not external conditions. Finally, this story tells us, when we face giants in our lives, we should not be frightened by surface difficulties. Like David, we should fix our eyes on God's might, believing he will help us overcome all challenges. Whether facing illness, adversity, or other difficulties, we can overcome through faith. For greater is he who is in us than he who is in the world. Lord, this is your battle. I trust in you. I surrender all my weapons and abilities to you, offering myself before you, trusting in you. If this content is valuable to you, please support us by subscribing, so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos. Together we can inspire more minds. Thank you for being here. May God bless you.